number?
With enhanced training. Last session, it was Christopher's Law. Was 1281, I believe. But it'll be a different bill number this next year. But the intent is still the same, and it's something that we need to grow momentum for.
Right.
Because we need to send a strong message to police departments in this state that it's not okay for you to just not only make up your own rules, but police yourselves, and then tell us we have this under control, we're working on it, we're working on community policing, we're working on enhanced training on use of force. No, you need human rights training, you need cultural diversity, you need life-saving skills, and this has to be mandated. I mean, if we've seen nowhere else than this recent prison scandal in the state of Maryland, that we cannot leave it to law enforcement to just run in a rogue and rampant way and make up their own rules as they go along. There has to be some oversight, and there has to be some guidelines. And I think it's time to stop playing around with this and believing that if we want to be tough on crime, we have to give unchecked deference to the policing entities, the policing institutions. You know, we often do that. It's not about that. It's not about, well, I want crime stopped or I want to be tough on crime. No, it's about you want justice to be administered. You want crime off of the streets. You want crime stopped, but you don't want the killing of innocent people, or even if they're not innocent, if they haven't committed murder in the presence of an officer, there is absolutely no reason why the officer should be committing murder on them or killing them in the street. You know, in this country, we still say, and I know it's diminishing every day, but we still say you have a right to be presumed innocent, and you have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers, and then sentenced. And then we say, even after all of that, it's not okay to sentence to death anymore. So why would we allow a police officer ever to make a decision in a moment, in an instant on the street, that in this case, I have a right to kill this person?
It's no different than what we say. We don't want thugs in blue uniforms and thugs in blue jeans. He acted no different than what they would say, thugs in blue jeans, and choking out, of course, the life of Christopher Brown. The question I'd have to ask, again, where can, I guess, the family go from here? I know they're represented by attorney Russell Neverdon and has talked about a civil suit, but could they, of course, look for a repeal and perhaps take it to the Department of Justice when we're looking at the death of this young man and seeing that Baltimore County under Scott Schellenberger did not bring a strong case. And we know that sometimes there can be a trial in terms of in the court of public opinion. And as we saw in Baltimore County, because of the strong relationship between Baltimore County and their police department, and we've seen it in Baltimore City. There was never even a thought of change of venue because of this. So thoughts, should they take it, of course, the next step in terms of not just a civil suit, but to the Department of Justice, and then the leadership in Baltimore County, from the county exec, Kevin Kamenetz, and then the black elected leadership in Baltimore County, and even, I think, one of the Cardins who wants to run for Attorney General. I think this was his opportunity to step up and stand strong for children in the county system, not just in terms of a black child, but if it happened to a white child. There is racism being played out here. The elephant in the room that some people don't want to talk about, even though the officer was black, it's still an issue of racism and class when we're looking at young black men and how they're being treated, young black women and how they're being treated.
It's not about the race of the officer or the person who called himself an officer for the purposes of this case. It is about the culture of policing. That's what it's about, and that's what we have to be serious about changing. And so it's not okay to take this one instance even and be outraged about it. That's really not enough for our elected officials to do. Now, do I believe the family should pursue this further with Justice Department? I do, because I think that the facts in and of themselves bear out that this person who was not in uniform, was not on duty, ran out of his house and chased a child, and because of his hand, the child is dead. Okay? And the child was not armed. And so right in and of itself, I mean, the fact that this is the way that this death occurred, I think that they should pursue that further. But again, I want to stress, it's not about this one instance. This is about elected officials and so-called leadership deciding that we're going to change the culture of policing, the culture of law enforcement, the whole entire system that hyper-polices in certain communities, over-arrests in certain communities, holds without bail in certain communities, and then gives overly speedy trials where it may not be warranted, and some other people can never get a day in court.
That's right.
So the bottom line is we have to honestly be serious about that. And frankly, without a movement that comes from the people,
yes.
and not just the paid people
right.
that work for these do-gooder institutions, because they are well-intentioned, many of them that work for the institutions. But we cannot wait for, the the Justice Policy Institute
right.
or these human rights alliance groups. All of these, we cannot wait for them to suddenly get the ear of the legislature or the ear of the executive for change. This has to come from the people. This is affecting us, not them. And so it has to be, a joint effort. But too often we see in Annapolis that the only time anybody is heard, like this death penalty, is when there's suddenly a mass movement
right.
about the death penalty repeal. And frankly, that affected a very small number of people. And if you're sincere about believing that, you have to be sincere that law enforcement officers should not be allowed to ever administer death penalty on the street.
That's right. I agree. Again, family, just tuning in and having a conversation with the Honorable Delegate Joe P. Carter, 41st Legislative Representative. Well, speaking of law enforcement, let's talk about the prison scandal. There was a recent article in the Sun paper last Sunday, Saturday going into Sunday, and as I've said from the beginning, it seems that their motive from the media to the Secretary of prisons, or I would say prison corruption is what we're seeing, Secretary Gary Maynard and the governor. It's almost seems as if from the outset they wanted to relegate this to the rank and file female officers and portray this and betray, I think, decent, hardworking correctional officers that work throughout the state, but here in Baltimore City, black women that may make up a majority of their officers that are there. So talk about the importance, I think, of this, again, ongoing scandal, but then also why when we have the three branches of government, from the executive to the judicial to the legislative, that the body that should have been investigating this and the actual committee that should have been investigating it, the Judiciary Committee that you are a part of and headed up by Chairman Joe Valerio, would not allow, I think, to do their job because the governor chose to set up and establish with Senate President Mike Miller and Michael Bush, the Speaker of the House, a task force as opposed to using the force that was already set up by the citizens in the state of Maryland. So one, the image of what I think the media has been trying to do and portray this as a rank and file black female officers, kind of a sexy story to titillate people. And then we'll talk about, again, I think the importance of the legislative branch to do a thorough investigation and vetting of getting to the facts regarding what's happening with the prison scandal.
Well, the media sadly always goes, but that's what media does, goes for the sensational story or the sexy story or the quick hit without a more comprehensive inquiry into the entire issue. So let's be very clear. It's not about women. It's not about black women. It's not about youth. It is about the decisions to lower the standards for hiring and the lack of pride and integrity instilled throughout the institution. Okay, it is about the lack of oversight. It's about simply the lack of leadership. You cannot blame the lowest level officer or the criminals or the accused criminals of creating the problem when it's your responsibility in public safety to keep a secure facility and and still ensure that people are safe and that crime is not afoot or running rampant. And so the issue is larger. But let me just say, when you talk about how this oversight thing is going in Annapolis and how this whole thing is playing out, when we have separation of powers, perhaps we need to go back and revisit that and have separation of party.
That's right.
Because the issue here is we don't get the benefit of the checks and balances of separation of powers where we have no separation of party, and we have a collusion of a Democrat leadership of the state with the Senate President, the House Speaker House Bush, and this is not personal attack on them. This is just about their interest is in protecting the image and the legacy and the future of the party, and right now they have their interest vested in Martin O'Malley, moving forward beyond Governor of Maryland into a larger role in this country. And so whatever they have to do to protect that, they will do that. And we've seen it before. We saw it, even if you look at even O'Malley's career, when he wanted to move from mayor to governor, you saw a lot of collusion to protect his image and really even lie about his record in order to make him more appealing. And so when you have that, you see that my chairman, Joe Valerio, was quick to say, we're going to look into this. Why? Because he knows that we have a very, very sharp, heavy-hitting committee that will probe and delve deeply into things from people, the likes of people like Delegate Michael Smigel, who's a Republican. Well, Republican, I'm not going to say it, but call him a rhino and name him. He's really, at heart, he's just a guy that's about freedom and liberty and justice. To the extremely brilliant and hard-hitting Delegate Louise Simmons from Montgomery County, who has people coming shaking in their seats when they come before our committee because he's so extremely sharp and probing and delves deep and doesn't take just skating over the issue.
Right.
And then you have people like me who are very interested in getting to the truth, and it's not about politics; it's about people's lives. And
That's right.
So getting back to this, when the article or the media talks about, well, these people come from the same communities. Well, didn't you know that when you hired them?
Sure.
Didn't you have a training process where you deprogrammed that and where you basically trained people how to overcome such challenges as when they are, there's efforts to lure them in or solicit them for wrongdoing? Didn't you admonish them of the penalties and repercussions for doing such things? And didn't you have supervisors and didn't you have managers and
cameras?
We know you didn't have cameras.
We didn't have cameras.
You turned the cameras off, and where's the oversight there to say, well, was this done willingly? Was it intentional? Did you deliberately cover up the cameras?
Don't you have repair orders?
Right.
Because the cameras are broken. Where are the repair orders? Who's responsible
it's irresponsible to just say, well, these things were broken down or they weren't on. No, your job was to have them to use them properly.
That's right.
So you can't just say, oh, my bad, didn't have the cameras functioning. It was your responsibility to do so. So honestly, as a leader of that kind of public safety, of the Department of Public Safety, you are more culpable. Culpable for that kind of negligence, or even intentional negligence, probably it could be. Than some low-level officer making a minimal salary with very little education that you chose to hire.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just absolutely preposterous the way this whole thing is going, and this ridiculous inquiry that they're making is it's a smokescreen. It's specifically designed to diminish the significance of the gravity of the problem, the gravity of the problem, and again, focus on the low level. And also, let us be clear. Baltimore City is not alone. So stop calling it the Baltimore City Detention Center scandal. No, this is the Maryland State Prison scandal under the governor's control, under the control of the Department of Public Safety. Okay? And the reason that is important is, on one hand, you read that, well, the Black Gorilla family is all over the city, the state, and the country. But on the other hand, you say, we're going to focus on Baltimore City. Well, if you had a brain in your head and you were part of that, wouldn't you just move your operations to other facilities in the state that weren't under the heavy watch right now? So come on. Even a neophyte in law enforcement knows better than that.
That's right.
So honestly, this is just crazy. And I'd like to see people read between the lines and read beneath the surface when you see these kinds of things. And another thing is that you talk about black women or gender. I really resent the fact that they're claiming that this is some kind of an issue about black women. How dare they vilify women or black women? That's absurd. This is about integrity and training and hiring and oversight. And I can't stress that enough. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but that's what it's about. It's certainly not about race or gender. As the problem.
That's right. Talk about, again, because to me, the black woman, the most, I think, probably is shown to be the most resilient, but also, and when we expand this envelope in terms of the voting bloc to the Democratic Party, that since they want to cover the party, but they don't want to cover in terms of protecting black women, and there's been a difference in terms of the reporting night and day. When you read the Washington Post, you see them raising the bigger issues in terms of, again, the protection of the public, as well as, again, the lowering of the standards when it comes to what's happening around this issue of the prison scandal. They're not trying to talk about this issue in terms of just dealing with sex between the inmates and 4 correctional officers, but really asking, I think, the pertinent questions and asking what did they know, when did they know it, and why nothing was done around this issue of the prison scandal is what we've seen from the Washington Post or Mr. McCarthy and others. And then I think juxtapose that regarding the Sun, trying to, again, as I said before, maximize the 4 correctional officers or the women correctional officers' behavior, and then minimize, again, those who are the supervisors, those who are in the top of the food chain, as well as the Secretary of Public Safety, Gary Maynard. Talk about what we've been seeing. Sun articles compared to what I think the Washington Post has raised.
Well, nothing surprises me, and I won't take this time to really talk about my issues with the Baltimore Sun and how they've been so in collusion with the Democrat leadership of the state and the city that they have not been responsible journalists. And they're really largely responsible for many of the problems that persist because of their